The Vietnam War was infamous for the guerrilla warfare American troops were largely unprepared for. The Viet Cong were on home turf and used this to their advantage when it came to creating and laying traps against their enemy. Not only were these cost-effective, but the bamboo used to construct many of them didn't register on the mine detectors used by the United States, which made them perfect for giving the VC the element of surprise and the upper hand. The goal of the traps was to maim, not kill, as this required the Americans to deal with their wounded comrades, slowing them down. This was made worse through secondary traps, which targeted those attempting to help the injured. These booby traps also had a devastating psychological effect on soldiers, greatly reducing morale. They were already fighting in difficult jungle terrain, and they also had to be on guard for well-disguised threats. In this video, we'll cover some of the most infamous Viet Cong traps faced by the Americans during the Vietnam War, and show just how lethal they really were. The bow trap was a simple yet effective tactic used by the Viet Cong during the early days of the Vietnam War. A bow, pulled taut and prepped to launch, was attached to a tripwire. When an American soldier set it off, the bow released right where they were standing, resulting in a direct hit to the middle of the body. Some guerrillas set up this type of trap within a small pit. In these instances, the bow was angled upward, so the projectile would strike the enemy in the lower extremities. Talk about a less than fun day at the office. Punji sticks were a common trap deployed by the Viet Cong. The sharpened bamboo, wooden, and sometimes metal stakes were often coated in feces, urine, or poisonous substances, with the goal of causing an infection in their victim. Punji sticks were placed pointing upright at the bottom of a hole, before being covered with material that would camouflage them. When an American soldier broke through the flimsy cover, they'd step on the spikes at the bottom and suffer injuries to their feet and legs. This particular booby trap could be made worse in two different ways. The first was by installing them at a downward angle along the sides of the hole. When these extra stakes were added, it became difficult for the victim to get themselves out without causing further injury to themselves, slowing down their unit while efforts were made to free them. A second way was by digging another hole next to the one equipped with the Punji sticks, with the aim being to trap a second combatant with little additional effort. When a soldier came to rescue his injured comrade, he'd fall into the adjacent hole and become trapped. Bamboo whips were another brutal booby trap employed by the Viet Cong. A bamboo pole with foot-long spikes was attached to a tripwire and pulled back taut. So when the tripwire was triggered, whoever tripped it would be impaled by the spikes as the pole whipped forward. As with Punji sticks, the spikes could be covered in poisonous material to further impact the victim's ability to heal. Terrifyingly, the pole and its spikes could reportedly travel up to 100 miles per hour. American soldiers literally wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The swinging mace operated in a very similar way to the bamboo whip, but instead of on a stick, the spikes were attached to a 24-inch ball that weighed upwards of 40 pounds. This was one of the more brutal tactics used by the Viet Cong, as when the hidden ball was triggered, it would use gravity to swing down from a tree and inflict terrible wounds to a soldier's upper body, in particular, their head and upper torso. Snake pits were primarily used within the Viet Cong's tunnel systems. Snake pits were encountered by American tunnel rats, but the Viet Cong would put snakes in other locations too, such as in their bags or in old weapons caches. Bamboo pit vipers were a common snake used by the Viet Cong. Within a few minutes of being bitten, the flesh surrounding the bite turned necrotic, swollen, and extremely painful. That being said, the Malayan crate was the most infamous, earning the nickname the two-step snake. This is rooted in a myth that a soldier bitten by one was killed in the short time it took him to move 2 steps. Cartridge traps operated in a similar way to Punji Sticks, in that they were placed within a hole in the ground. An ammunition round was set within a tube made from bamboo with a nail and wooden board placed underneath to act as a mock firing pin. Camouflage was then placed over top to prevent American soldiers from detecting it in advance. When they stepped on the booby trap, the troops' weight would activate the ammunition and fire it through their feet, earning them the slightly funny nickname, toe poppers. The extent of the injury was largely based on the size of the shell. Smaller ones often left men permanently disabled, while larger shells were fatal. As the name suggests, the grenade in a can was constructed by placing a grenade, with its pin removed, into a can, which held down the striker lever. A tripwire was then attached and, when disturbed, would pull the explosive out of the can and cause it to detonate. This type of trap could either be constructed with a single can and a stake, or with 2. If 2 cans were used, they were mounted on trees on either side of a path, with a tripwire running between them. These types of tactics were typically used along stream locations and tunnel entrances. These booby traps were created based on the fact that American troops loved capturing the flags of their enemies. When Viet Cong guerrillas were forced from their bases, they'd rig their flags with explosives, which detonated when the Americans took them down. The fighters knew they also enjoyed taking other items as war trophies, meaning they rigged them with similar explosives, so that if the enemy combatants wanted to take anything from abandoned camps, the explosives would detonate, causing additional casualties. That's it for today's deep dive into the terrifying booby traps used by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. They weren't just brutal, they were a strategic nightmare for American and South Vietnamese forces. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you want more military history, tactics, and war stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.